The jungle did not want them there. Dara Novak could feel it in the way the air sat heavy and still, the way the tall violet trees held their thick branches low like arms blocking a doorway. Survey Zone 7 Theta had been cataloged from orbit as stable, low threat, and worth a closer look. That was 3 hours ago. Now, standing knee-deep in root-twisted mud with her scanner blinking uncertain readings, Dara was beginning to think whoever wrote that report had never actually set foot on the ground. Dada. Engineer Sable's voice came from just behind her left shoulder, quiet and tight. The ground changed. She had noticed. The soil under their boots had gone from firm packed earth to something softer, disturbed. Like something large had been moving through here recently, and often, she crouched and pressed 2 fingers into the mud. The depression was wide, deep, and shaped like nothing that belonged to any creature in the survey catalog. "Mark it," she said. Sable tapped his wrist pad. Overseer Pell, the Solari representative assigned to observe the survey, clicked his thin fingers together in the way his species expressed impatience. "We have covered enough ground. I recommend we return to the shuttle and file the preliminary report." "We haven't reached the ravine yet," Dara said. "The ravine is not worth the delay." Dara straightened and kept walking. She had been a wildlife specialist for 11 years before signing with the Survey Corps, 6 of those years spent in some of the most dangerous terrain Earth had to offer. She had learned to read ground the way some people read text, and what she was reading right now told her something lived nearby. Something big. Something that came and went from the same path, again and again. She found the ravine 10 minutes later, and at the bottom of it, half buried under a collapsed shelf of dark stone, were 2 cubs. They were small, maybe the size of large earth dogs, covered in short gray-blue fur that was matted with dirt and dried blood. Each one had 6 eyes, all of them squeezed shut. Their legs scrambled weakly against the rock pinning them. One of them made a sound, low and broken and exhausted, like it had been making that sound for a long time and was almost out of the strength to keep doing it. Dara was down the ravine wall before anyone could say a word. "Dara, stop." Dr. Finn Casper's voice came sharp from the ridge above. "We don't know what species. They're pinned," she said. "They're hurt. We don't know what they are. I know what they are right now. They're trapped." The rock shelf was not enormous, but it was heavy. She could see where it had sheared off from the ravine wall, probably during the night rains that soaked this moon every few days. The cubs had been here a while, long enough to be exhausted, long enough to stop crying loudly and start making that low, quiet, terrible sound instead. Overseer Pell appeared at the ravine edge and looked down with his pale, compound eyes. "Leave them. We do not know the parent species. Interfering with young animals on uncatalogued worlds is expressly discouraged under Concord Survey Protocol 14. "I've read Protocol 14, Dara said, already working her hands under the edge of the stone. "It says discouraged, not forbidden." Sable slid down into the ravine beside her without being asked. He was young and nervous most of the time, the kind of person who checked over his shoulder twice before stepping through any door. But he put his hands under the stone next to hers and said nothing except, "On 3. They lifted together. The rock was brutal weight, and it did not want to move, but it moved. 1 inch, 2 inches. The cubs scrambled, and one of them pulled free, tumbling sideways into the mud and lying still, panting hard. The second one was still caught, one back leg twisted awkwardly under a smaller fragment. "Hold it," Dara said through her teeth. Sable held it. She reached down with her free hand and carefully, slowly, moved the smaller fragment aside. The second cub pulled free. It did not run. It simply lay in the mud next to its sibling, sides heaving, all 6 eyes blinking open for the first time. They were amber, bright amber like lit glass. Dara and Sable lowered the rock shelf back down, and both of them stood there breathing hard, mud up to their elbows. Dr. Finn had climbed down by then and was already crouching near the cubs with his scanner running, his face carefully neutral the way it got when he was worried but did not want to say so. "Lacerations, dehydration, one possible fracture on the smaller one's back left leg," he said quietly. "They've been here at least 18 hours. 18 hours alone in a ravine, pinned, and calling for a parent that hadn't come back yet. Dara stood and turned slowly, reading the jungle around them. The trees were dense. The light was getting lower. Her scanner was still blinking uncertain readings. Something nearby was confusing the sensors. Something the catalog didn't know how to measure. Then she heard it. Not close. Not yet. But rolling through the jungle like a wave through deep water, moving every leaf and loose stone on its way, felt in the chest before it reached the ears to roar, low and enormous, and coming toward the ravine to Sable's face had gone the color of old paper. "Is that the mother?" Dara said. She did not move toward the ravine wall. She did not reach for the emergency signal on her belt. She stood in the mud between the cubs and the sound, and she waited. The first thing the Vreth female broke was a tree. Not because the tree was in her way. It was well off to the side of her path. She broke it because she could, because she was moving fast and furious, and everything in range of her body was a thing to be destroyed. The crack of it splitting at the trunk rang through the ravine like a gunshot, and that was when Analyst Wynn and Navigator San, the two other Solari representatives, turned and ran. Overseer Pell scrambled up the ravine wall after them. Dr. Finn grabbed for the climbing rope. Sable took one step toward the wall and then stopped, looking back at Dara. She had not moved. "Dara, stay still," she said. Her voice was low and even. "Do not run. She is going to. Running tells her we are prey. Stand still and we are something else. Something she hasn't decided about yet." Sable made a sound that was not quite a word. But he stopped moving. The Vreth female came through the tree line at the top of the ravine, and the world seemed to get smaller when she arrived. She was enormous, easily 3 meters at the shoulder, quadrupedal, with a hide that looked like layered stone, dark, overlapping plates of natural armor running from her skull down the length of her spine. Her 6 eyes caught the fading light and threw it back amber, the same color as the cubs, and her talons were long enough to rake through the ravine wall the way a hand rakes through sand. She saw the cubs first. The sound she made was not a roar. It was something lower and rawer than that, something that had no good word for it in any human language. She dropped down the ravine wall in 2 movements, landed heavy enough that the ground shook, and covered the distance to the cubs in an instant. She was over them immediately, circling, sniffing, her head swinging low to check them with frantic precision. And then she saw Dara. She went still. Every plate of armor along her spine lifted, the way a dog's hackles rise but vast, covering her whole back in a ridge of raised stone-gray edges. Her 6 eyes fixed on Dara. All of them. Full attention, the kind of attention that is the last thing most creatures ever receive from an apex predator. Dara did not step back. She did not raise her hands. She let her arms hang loose at her sides, and she looked the Vreth female directly in the face, not as a challenge, but the way you look at something you are not afraid of even when you are terrified, because you have decided that fear is not useful right now. The Vreth female charged. She covered the gap in less than a second, and she stopped with her open mouth 3 inches from Dara's face. Hot breath hit Dara like a wall of warm, wet air. Teeth the length of fingers, slightly curved, right at eye level. The sound in her throat was constant and enormous, a vibration more than a noise. Dara breathed out slowly. She did not flinch. There was a long moment where nothing in the ravine moved. Not the Vreth, not Dara, not Sable, who had gone so still he had stopped blinking. The 2 cubs made small sound from the mud behind the mother's back legs, and the Vreth's 6 eyes stayed locked on Dara's too. Then Dara did something slow and deliberate. She turned her head, just slightly, toward the cubs. She looked at them. She looked back at the Vreth female. Then she took 1 step sideways, clearing the space between the mother and her children, and she stopped. She was not backing away. She was stepping aside. The Vreth female watched her do it. The ridge along her spine did not drop, but did not rise further. She held position for another breath, and another. Then she turned and pressed her enormous head down against the cubs, checking them again, nosing at the injured leg, licking the dried mud from the smaller one's face. Sable exhaled so hard it sounded like he had been holding his breath since the tree broke. "She's not going to kill us," he whispered. "Not right now," Dara said quietly. The Vreth female looked up at that, looked directly at Dara again. It was impossible to say what a creature with alien eyes and no shared language was thinking. It was impossible to say whether any of what had just happened meant anything to her beyond threat, not threat, and the enormous relief of finding her cubs alive. But she had charged to kill, and she had stopped. That was real. That was a choice, Doctor. Finn spoke from above them, where he had frozen on the rope halfway up the ravine wall. His voice was very careful. The shuttle path is blocked. She's sitting between us and the exit. Dara looked at the Vreth female, then at the one narrow path that led out of the ravine and back through the jungle to the shuttle, then at the sky, which was going dark faster than she would have liked. Then we stay, she said. We don't crowd her. We don't make sudden movements. We sit down and we wait. Wait for what? Dara lowered herself slowly to the mud floor of the ravine and sat cross-legged, hands in her lap, visible. The Vreth female watched her do it and made no move. For her to trust that we're not a threat, Dara said. However long that takes. Night on Survey Zone 7 Theta did not arrive slowly. It dropped point one moment the sky was a deep orange through the tree canopy above the ravine, and the next it was black, and the jungle became a place of sound without shape. Things called in the dark that had no catalog entry. The violet trees groaned in the wind. The ravine walls seemed to press closer. The Vreth female had not moved. She lay curled around her cubs like a wall of living armor, her breath slow and rhythmic now, her eyes half closed but never fully shut. She was watching. She was always watching. Dara sat 3 meters away and kept herself still. Dr. Finn had come down from the rope and sat beside her. Sable sat on her other side, knees pulled up, arms wrapped around them. None of them had spoken in over an hour. Overseer Pell's voice crackled through the comm unit on Dara's wrist. Novak, report. She kept her voice very low. We're in the ravine. The Vreth female is present. Everyone is unharmed. You need to extract immediately. The shuttle cannot wait past. The shuttle will wait. Captain Osei's voice cut in over the channel, calm and flat. Dara, what do you need? She thought about it. Time. You have it. Overseer Pell said something sharp and unhappy in his own language that the translator rendered approximately, as we are wasting resources on sentiment. Dara clicked the comm off. She reached slowly into her pack and took out 2 ration bars. She unwrapped the first one, and the sound of the wrapper made the Vreth female's eyes open fully and all 6 lock on her at once. Dara moved slowly, kept her hands visible, and placed a ration bar on the ground about a meter in front of her. Then she unwrapped the second one and ate it herself. She did not offer the food to the cubs or push it toward them. She simply left it there. The Vreth female watched. She did not come forward, but she watched. 20 minutes later, one of the cubs crawled out from under its mother's foreleg and made its way toward the ration bar on unsteady legs. It sniffed it. It tasted it. It made a small sound and began eating. The Vreth female's head came up fast, and she let out a low warning sound. The cub ignored her completely in the way that young things everywhere in the universe ignore warnings when they have found something interesting. Dara pressed her lips together to keep from smiling, because smiling meant showing teeth, and showing teeth was still a bad idea. The smaller cub, the one with the fractured leg, had not moved much. It lay close against its mother, and every time it shifted it made a tight, pained sound. Doctor. Finn leaned toward Dara. The leg needs to be stabilized. If it heals wrong out here, the cub will not walk properly. I know. Can we? Dara looked at the Vreth female. Maybe. Not yet. She began a new thing instead. Every few minutes she would move slightly, then stop. She would shift her position, then settle. She wanted the Vreth female to see her move and not attack, over and over, so that movement stopped meaning threat and started meaning just her. Just the soft one who stays in the mud and doesn't hurt you in. IT took most of the night to be why the 3rd hour, the larger cub had crossed over and laid down beside Dara's leg. It simply decided that was a fine place to sleep. Dara felt the small warm weight against her calf and did not move a centimeter. The Vreth female stared at this for a long time. Her tail moved once, a slow sideways sweep. Then she lowered her head back down onto her forelegs, Sable was asleep, sitting upright, his head drooped forward. Dr. Finn was awake, watching the injured cub with the focused look he got when he was solving a problem in his head. Now, he murmured. Dara looked at the Vreth female. Move like you're cold. Slow. Reach into your kit, but keep it low and quiet. Finn moved like he was barely moving at all. He drew out a wrap bandage and a short stabilizing rod from his kit, took them in both hands, and went still again. He waited. Then he began the slowest crawl toward the injured cub that anything had ever done. The Vreth female's head came up. Every plate on her back lifted. Dara spoke, not to Finn, not to the Vreth, just into the air, low and steady. It's all right. He's helping. That's all he does. He helps. The Vreth female did not understand the words, but she had been watching Dara for 3 hours. She had watched her sit in the mud and not reach for a weapon. She had watched her leave food and not take it back. She had watched her cub sleep against the soft one's leg without dying, the plates along her back lowered. Slowly, not all the way, but enough. Finn reached the injured cub. He worked by feel and by the glow of a tiny light no bigger than a thumbnail. And he was good at his job, and when he was done, the cub's leg was wrapped and splinted, and it made one sharp cry, and then went quiet. The Vreth female lifted her head at the cry. She looked at her cub. She looked at Finn. She looked at Dara. Then she reached forward with her huge scarred head and licked the injured cub once from ear to chin and put her head back down to, in the jungle above. Dara's comm lit up with a Concord beacon. Pell's report had reached the patrol ship. They were coming. The call came through at dawn, when the jungle was still gray and dripping. Commander Doss appeared on the screen above Dara's wrist comm, relayed through the survey vessel in orbit. He was Solari, like Pell, but where Pell was nervous and sharp, Doss was very quiet. The kind of quiet that came from authority, so complete it no longer needed to raise its voice. Specialist Novak, he said, I have reviewed Overseer Pell's report. My vessel arrives in 68 hours. You will prepare for extraction. We're in a stable situation, Dara said. She was still sitting in the ravine. The Vreth female was asleep 5 meters away. The Vreth female has shown no aggression since the initial confrontation. The cubs are I'm not interested in the current moment, Doss said. I am interested in the pattern. A species of apex predator, unclassified, with demonstrated territorial and violent behavior. Standard Concord protocol for uncatalogued threat fauna. She let us treat her cub's broken leg, Dara said. Doss paused. Clarify. The smaller cub had a fracture. Dr. Finn stabilized and wrapped it last night. The mother was present the entire time. She watched. She did not attack. A longer pause. That is unusual. That is more than unusual. No Vreth in any previous encounter log has ever allowed another species within striking range of their young without attacking. She made a choice, Commander. She evaluated us, and she made a choice. Captain Osei's voice cut in from the ship above. Commander, I am formally requesting a 48-hour observation window before any protocol action is taken. Specialist Novak is on the ground, and her assessment is that this animal demonstrates higher behavioral reasoning. Doss took a moment. Granted, 48 hours, after which, if the threat designation cannot be formally challenged, standard protocol proceeds. He cut the connection. Pell's voice came on immediately after. You are wasting everyone's time. The creature is a predator. It will behave as a predator. She already didn't, Dara said, and clicked off the comm. She spent the day in the ravine. She moved when the Vreth female was watching. She sat when she was sleeping. She shared her food openly, eating her own portion and leaving a second on the ground. By midday, both cubs had eaten from her hand, not because she offered it, but because they chose to come to her, and she let them, and did not grab or hold or do anything except sit still. The larger cub, who was healthy and bold and seemingly convinced that the strange soft creature in the ravine was deeply interesting, spent an hour trying to chew through the strap of Dara's pack. She let it. The Vreth female watched this with her head on her foreleg and her 6 eyes half open. Toward afternoon, Dara did the thing she had been building toward all day. She stood up slowly, walked to the ravine wall, climbed halfway out, and stopped. She sat on the edge, visible, looking back into the ravine. She waited 5 minutes. Then she climbed back down and returned to her spot. She did this 3 times over the next 2 hours. Each time she went a little further. Each time she came back. She wanted the Vreth female to see that leaving was not a threat and coming back was not a trap. She wanted her to understand the shape of what a safe creature looked like. On the 4th approach, Sable said quietly, "She's not watching you go anymore. She stopped tracking you about 10 minutes ago." Dara looked. He was right. The Vreth female had her eyes on her cubs, not on Dara. The path to the ravine exit was open and the mother's attention had moved on. That was trust. Not the kind with a name, not the kind you could write in a report, but the kind that lived in the body of an animal who had decided you were no longer a variable worth tracking. Doctor Finn recorded everything. He filed a secondary report alongside Dara's, dense with observed behaviors, timestamps, and what he called, with careful scientific language, an anomalous pattern of decision-making consistent with advanced social cognition. What he meant was, she thinks. She watches and she thinks and she decides. 62 hours left on Commander Doss's window. That evening, Dara sat at the ravine edge as the sky went orange, and she watched the Vreth female teach the larger cub how to dig. She pressed the cub's paw into the earth with her nose and stepped back and waited. The cub dug. She made a sound, and the cub stopped and looked. She made another sound, and the cub dug again. Teaching. Step by step, sound by sound. A mother teaching her child a skill it would need to survive. Dara thought about Doss and his protocols and his quiet, complete authority. She thought about the word threat and what it meant and who got to decide. She thought about a creature who had every right to kill 3 humans in her home and had instead looked at them and chosen, twice, to do something else. Her calm lit up. It was Osei. His voice was careful. Doss has reviewed the footage from today. He wants to speak with you. Tonight. Dara looked at the Vreth female one more time. Then she climbed out of the ravine to take the call. Commander Doss landed at midday on the 2nd day. His shuttle came down in the wide clearing at the jungle's edge where the survey team had first made camp, 200 meters from the ravine. It was a gray ship, clean-lined and efficient, and 3 armed Concord soldiers came out first, fanning into positions before Doss himself stepped down. He was taller than Pell by a head, and he wore his rank in the way he moved, taking up the space around him without effort. He looked at the jungle. He looked at Dara, who was standing at the tree line. He said nothing yet, which was not comforting. Captain Osei stood beside Dara. He had come down from the ship that morning, which was not something captains were required to do, but he had done it anyway. Dr. Finn was to Dara's left. Sable stood slightly behind them, holding the equipment bag, and when Doss's eyes passed over him, he stood a little straighter and tried to look useful. Pell came forward from where he had been waiting near the camp. "Commander, thank you for I have reviewed the footage," Doss said, and Pell stopped talking. Doss looked at Dara. "You spent 40 hours in the ravine with the animal." "Yes." "In your conclusion, she is not a threat. She is a mother who found strangers near her injured cubs and chose not to kill them. That is not what an unthinking predator does. That is judgment." Doss was quiet for a moment. "My protocol exists because unclassified apex fauna have killed survey teams. I do not make these designations to be cruel." "I know," Dara said, "but protocol was written for creatures that don't think." "She thinks." Doss looked at the jungle for a long time. Then he opened the pad in his hand. "Standard designation. Threat fauna, class 3. Recommended action, don't," Dara said. Pell made a sharp sound. "Novak, you do not speak to a Concord commander. I am asking you not to do this," Dara said to Doss directly. "Not telling. Asking. Give me 1 more hour." The clearing was quiet. The jungle behind them was not. It moved and breathed in its own constant way. Doss looked at the pad. Then he looked at Dara. 1 hour, he said. She went into the jungle alone. She found the ravine in 10 minutes. The Vreth female was awake, sitting upright, watching the direction of the shuttle's sounds. Her armor plates were raised. She had heard the landing. She was already tense. Dara climbed down into the ravine and walked to her usual spot and sat. She put her hands in her lap. She waited. The Vreth female stared at the ravine edge for a while. Then she looked at Dara. Her plates lowered, not fully, but enough to show she knew who this was. that she had filed Dara away somewhere in her understanding as a thing that was not dangerous, which was still extraordinary and still made Dara feel something large and wordless in her chest. She sat with her for 20 minutes. Then she stood, and she pointed toward the clearing. She had no idea if the gesture meant anything, but she was going to try. She walked to the ravine edge and looked back. The Vreth female watched her. Dara stepped out of the ravine and stopped. Visible, waiting, below, the Vreth female stood up. The cubs bumped against her legs. She looked at them. She looked up at Dara. Then, with the slow and deliberate movement of something that has decided rather than been led, she walked up the ravine wall and came to stand at the edge of the jungle. Doss saw her before anyone spoke. His hand went to his side on instinct. The three soldiers raised their weapons, and the Vreth female stopped. She looked at the soldiers. She looked at Dara, standing between her and the armed line. She looked at the weapons, which she must have understood the shape of, even if not the mechanism. And then she did something that made the clearing go absolutely silent. She lowered her head. Slowly. Not to the ground, but down, plates flat, eyes forward, in the exact posture she had held when Dara stood before her in the ravine. The posture that said, "I have decided you are not a threat." She was giving back the gesture that Dara had given her. Across 40 hours in a species barrier, and every reason in the universe to do otherwise, one of the cubs padded past his mother's legs and sat down directly beside Dara's boot. Doss had not moved. His hand was no longer at his side. He was staring at the Vreth female with an expression that had stopped being professional and become something more honest. The soldier on the left looked at him. "Commander?" Doss said nothing for a long time. The clearing held its breath. Then he lowered the pad. He did not say what changed his mind. He did not announce a decision or explain his reasoning. He simply put the pad in his coat and stood there looking at a creature that was looking back at him with nothing that resembled fear, and he was quiet, which, in its own way, was an answer. Commander Doss filed his report 3 hours after the clearing to in it. He listed the Vreth female under a designation that had been used only 11 times in Concord history. Person of behavioral interest, unclassified species. It was a legal standing, not a category. It meant the Concord could not order a culling without a full tribunal, could not classify the species as threat fauna without an extended review, and was required to assign a xenobiologist to ongoing observation. The report cited, in precise and careful language, anomalous behavioral indicators consistent with advanced social reasoning and cross-species communication. What it did not say, because official reports do not say such things, was that a massive armored predator had looked at a line of armed soldiers and made a choice, and that the choice had been evident in its posture, and that Doss had seen it clearly and had not been able to look away. Pell protested, loudly, formally, and in writing. Doss acknowledged the protest and did nothing with it. Dara heard all of this secondhand, relayed through Captain Osei. Because she had gone back to the ravine, she spent the last evening there without any particular purpose. The cubs were healthy. The smaller one was walking on its splinted leg with some care, but walking. The larger one had discovered that if it sat near Dara long enough, she would eventually scratch behind the place where its ears would have been if it had ears in the usual sense, and it returned to this discovery repeatedly with great satisfaction. The Vreth female did not approach. She sat across the ravine and watched, and Dara sat on her side and watched back, and the light went through its changes the way light does when no one is asking it to hurry. When the sky went dark, Dara stood up for the last time. She picked up her pack. She looked at the Vreth female and said quietly, "Okay, that's it. You've got them back, and they're going to be fine." She made a turn and climb out. She had said her goodbyes to animals before. She had worked with dangerous creatures her whole adult life, and she knew the rule, which was that you did not attach, because they could not follow you, and you could not stay, and caring too much made you careless on the next job. She turned. The Vreth female moved. She came across the ravine in several long, quiet steps, and she stopped 2 feet behind Dara. Dara heard her and went still. She turned slowly. The Vreth female lowered her head. Not her whole body, not the deep posture from the clearing. Just her head, that enormous scarred head with its 6 amber eyes, brought forward and down until it touched, very gently, the center of Dara's chest. It stayed there. Dara felt the weight of it, the warmth, the slow breath. She raised one hand, slowly, and placed it between the Vreth's eyes. The armor plates there were smooth and warm, like sun-heated stone. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then the Vreth lifted her head, turned, and walked back to her cubs. She lay down and curled around them and closed most of her eyes, and she did not look back. Dara climbed out of the ravine. Sable was waiting at the top of the torch in her second jacket. He had been doing that for 2 days, waiting at the top with some useful thing, not saying much. He handed her the jacket. She put on. They walked back toward camp together in the dark. After a while, Sable said, "What was that?" At the end, Dara thought about it. "I don't know exactly. I think she was saying goodbye." Do Vreth do that? Not in any record I've ever read. Sable thought about that for a moment. So she invented it. Dara didn't answer. But that was more or less what she believed. 3 weeks later, back in the Survey Corps offices on Concord Station, she filed her final report. It was thorough and measured and used precise language throughout. At the end, in a section that was not technically required, she wrote, "The Vreth female demonstrated and repeated consistent behavior that she was capable of observing, reasoning, and choosing. She chose not to harm us when she could have. She allowed treatment of her injured cub. She learned to read our stillness as safety. She gave back a gesture she had received. None of this was instinct. All of it was decision. That if the Concord's definition of a thinking being requires that a being speak or build or write, then perhaps the definition needs to be larger. Because she thought. I watched her think. And when she was done thinking, she was in the centuries that followed. The Vreth were studied more closely than any species in the Concord's modern record. Xenobiologists noted that Vreth communities near human outposts showed a consistent pattern unlike their behavior anywhere else. Less aggression toward visitors, a tendency to allow approach, an almost watchful stillness near the boundaries of human settlements, as though they were keeping an eye on things, and no one could fully explain it. When researchers eventually asked Dara Novak, who was by then very old and had spent most of her life on the question, she gave the same answer every time. They remember who didn't run.